Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our February CCHBA board meeting, or not board meeting, but our monthly meeting. I'm glad y'all could be on. Definitely, if you haven't read the newsletter, definitely read the newsletter because we've got some information in there from the change in bottling for the state of Texas. It's a lot of information to just talk about here tonight. I want to get Blake on and him. He's our mega speaker tonight, so he's going to do our tips and our speaking. So, and I know he's busy up in California. Most of all our commercial guys got our bees in California right now, so lots of work being done right now. So, but yeah, definitely get on to our newsletter, read that. It's a new change in there. Basically, what it does is a quick synopsis is allows everybody to bottle your own. No requirements there for the sticker anymore. You can sell it yourself, go online. So big changes in there. Just get on there, read that. Like I said, there's a lot of information change. And what it basically does is the Texas State Health Department is no longer putting their own guidelines out. They're following FDA guidelines. So like I said, a lot of big changes for some of the hobbyist level, and actually it's for all honey producers. So definitely read up on the newsletter if you haven't read up on the newsletter. We're going to have a great meeting tonight. And I will turn this over to Blake and let him get started.
Cool. Thank you, Skip. Appreciate that. Hear and see me okay? Perfect. Okay, great. Well, as you guys can see, I carry a semi-load of bee boxes around me even to California just to present to you guys in front of. So no, it's a virtual background, but that it does give consistency. If I'm in California or Texas, I can look like I'm in the same place. So I'm excited about tonight. I'm going to get into the monthly tips, and let me share my screen here. And this is especially applicable because of the weather that we have approaching in the next couple of days in Texas. So out here where I am in California, it's balmy 70 degrees all week. So I just may not come home for a week or so, because I sure want to miss that 12 degree weather if at all possible. So okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we have going on in the bees in a really practical sense, and then we're going to get into a little bit about transitioning from a small scale beekeeper into a sideline beekeeper. But even beyond that, we're going to talk more about just how to try to make some extra money in beekeeping, whether that's through selling honey on a small scale at farmers markets, or selling nooks, or some of the greatest mistakes people make when they're trying to make money in beekeeping, et cetera. So it's not really going to be how to become a commercial beekeeper. It's going to be really the business of beekeeping and how to make a little extra money in beekeeping. So hopefully you'll find that interesting. But as far as February goes, I'm going to just kind of, one really quick thing. If you haven't gotten the Texas Bee Supply magazine, you might want to check that out. It's on our website. And I just bring that up because there's a lot of helpful tips in there on getting bees ready for springtime and doing that when cold fronts hit. So that might be helpful to you. So I'm going to address the elephant in the room with beekeeping tips before we get into some other topics, because it's about to get incredibly cold for us in North Texas. I mean, I think I saw last I looked earlier today, we were getting down to 12 degrees a couple of nights, and that's cold for North Texas. I mean, that's cold for any year. So here's some tips on things to do as you think about how to prep for this cold weather. First, if your hive has a couple frames of brood, so if your hive is strong and healthy and already has a couple frames of brood, I would put a pollen patty on there right away, and that's going to allow them to keep rearing brood and keep them from cannibalizing brood during that cold period. The pollen patty isn't so much for the cold, the cold weather. It's more because of the duration of that cold. It's starting tomorrow. It's going to get cold enough during the day that the bees can't fly, and it's going to stay that cold for over a week. And if your bees already have 2 or more frames of brood, they will often run out of pollen, stored pollen, to feed that developing brood. And then they'll start cannibalizing that brood because they can't get out and gather more pollen. Even once they can get out after this cold snap, this cold is going to kill all the blooming plants for a week or so until those cold hardy plants start blooming again. So I'm as we're talking here, I'm looking at the weather, because if you can get out there like this evening and put on a pollen patty, I would, because it looks like, well, you can still do it tomorrow. The high is 48 tomorrow. So that's chilly, but not too cold to go in and throw a pollen patty in the hive. So this really applies to stronger hives. If you've got a hive that's 3 or 4 frames of bees and not much brood, I wouldn't worry about giving them a pollen patty, because they're not going to have enough brood to need that extra boost of protein. But like I said, this is for strong hives that are a deep box full of bees or more and already have some brood. Give them that pollen patty. The second thing is make sure that hives that are strong, so a deep box or more full of bees, have at least 20 pounds of stored food in their second box and 2 to 4 frames of honey in their bottom box. If they don't, then you can use a top feeder or a Ziploc bag feeder or some form of feeder to get food, get syrup directly over that cluster and feed them. If you have a feeder out in front of the hive, or even a division board feeder, it's probably going to be too cold for them to travel to that feeder and eat. They need food directly over that hive in order to get access to food when it's that cold. The third thing is, ideally don't go through and do a full hive inspection tomorrow. It's going to be too cold. So just quick looks, lift up on the hive to see how much weight it has, make sure they have enough food. If they are short on food, or if they need a pollen patty, I would still go in there and do that tomorrow. Just make sure you really weight down your lid so wind can't blow off the lid, because you're going to be breaking that propolis seal tomorrow. Fourth is, make sure if you have a screen bottom board that the cold wind can't blow up under that screen bottom board. You've probably already done that, but just double check it. Make sure that cold wind, you don't have to seal up the bottom board. You just don't want cold wind blowing up under it. If it makes you feel better, you can seal up the screen bottom board if it makes you feel a little better. Fifth, you can avoid the urge to wrap or insulate the hive. I know that it seems logical that we wrap a hive or insulate a hive to help keep them warmer. The studies are pretty scarce that show that's actually that helpful. The bees really don't keep the whole inside of the hive warm. They only keep their immediate cluster warm. And so insulating the outside of the hive doesn't usually provide enough help to make it worthwhile. Number 6, you can expect any small or really weak hives to die this week, unfortunately. When a hive is only 1 or 2 frames covered in bees, they often can't generate enough heat to keep themselves warm, and so you're going to see those really small weak hives. They will most likely freeze, unfortunately, this weekend when it gets down into the teens. So stronger hives should have no problem, but if you have really small weak hives, they probably aren't going to survive this week, unfortunately. So so you should expect to see some dead small hives. And there's, short of maybe bringing them into your garage or living room, there's not much you can do to save them. So, but hey, if you got them in a little nook box or a single hive, you could seal up the entrance and put them in the garage if you'd like to. That does work. And then number 7, don't worry too much. Cold fronts are normal. Cold fronts this time of year are normal. Strong hives, or even 4 or 5 frames of bees, they're used to handling this. So as long as they have enough food, they should be able to handle this cold front, no problem. So don't worry about it too much. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about February. So much for spring, right? I mean, February is to be when spring arrives, and it has seemed like it up until this coming week. This picture in the background, this is an elm tree. And so we started seeing the elm trees bloom about a week and a half ago to 2 weeks ago. The elm trees really started blooming in North Texas, and that's provided an awesome early pollen source for bees. It's one of the best, and so the bees have really been hauling pollen in the past week, especially. Now this cold will shut that down for a while, and then of course we're still seeing some of that that yellow mustard on the far left, the dandelions in the middle, and that henbit on the right, they're all blooming and have been providing pretty impressive pollen flows the last week or so for bees. So the bees kind of got the first hint of spring and pulled in a lot of pollen, not much nectar, but a little bit. And the queens have really started ramping up. That's going to kind of shut down for the next couple of weeks, unfortunately. What I'm kind of seeing right now is, we're seeing that brood really ramp up. We're seeing a strong pollen flow in most areas of North Texas when the bees have been able to forage. And of course, like we already talked about, the temperature is a roller coaster, and the next week is going to really shut down that pollen flow for probably 10 plus days. Bee flight and feed implications, you're going to see the bees flying hard and heavy when it's 55 or so degrees and above, and then no flight at all if it's cooler than that or really windy. As far as feeding goes, we already talked about kind of preparing for this cold front, but that aside, for the month of November, you really need to feed as needed to maintain a 20-pound surplus in the second box for a hive that's at least one deep box full of bees or more. If your hive is 4 frames of bees, half of a deep box, they don't need, 20 pounds of stores up in their second box. They may only need 10 to 15 pounds. But a really strong hive can consume up to 2 frames of honey to produce 1 frame of brood. And this time of year, even when it is warm in February and most of March, there's not much natural nectar coming in. There's a lot of pollen, which really makes the bees grow, but there's really not much nectar coming in. So, that's why we've really got to watch those stores, those syrup or honey stores, because the bees are growing so fast and there's not much natural nectar coming in. You can switch to 1-to-1 syrup. So if you've been feeding the 2-to-1, you can start transitioning that once this cold front passes over to the 1-to-1 syrup. That can help stimulate the queen, help her lay more, and help the bees draw out more wax. After this cold front, I would recommend using a division board or top feeder rather than an entrance feeder. Entrance feeders, the bees can get kind of robby for February and March. So I would err towards the internal feeders to cut down on robbing for the next couple of months. And then finally, you can check 2 to 3 times in the month of February just to make sure that the bees have the food that they need to keep rearing that brood. Pollen patties generally are not necessary in February, except for when I do recommend them is when we see what we're seeing this week. And that's a sudden cold front where it gets really cold and the bees can't get out and forage for several days in a row. That's when I do recommend pollen patties in February. If it's just a normal February where it can be warm and then we have a cold couple days and it gets warm, kind of like it's been the last 2 weeks, I'm not really giving my bees pollen patties. But now when we have these, a week plus where the bees aren't going to get out and forage, I do start feeding pollen patties. And that's true of February or March. I mean, sometimes we can get a week in March when the bees can't fly. And that's even more important because by March, they've got even more brood. And so I run out there and give everybody a patty if it happens in February or March. February and varroa mites. So test is the biggest recommendation I have for you, because most hives don't have high varroa mite levels in February. In fact, many hives won't have high varroa mite levels until summer. If you had very low varroa mite levels late last fall, so if you did a test in October or November and you had 0 to 1 mite per 100 bees, there hasn't been enough brood reared over the winter to cause that varroa mite number to go up. So you shouldn't have an issue with varroa mites. Now, if you did a test in November and you had 4 mites per 100, you need to get a treatment in there. You're going to have an issue. Or if you hadn't done a test since last summer, again, you need to do a test in February. If mites are over 2 per 100 bees in February and March, it's a good time to take some action to help control the varroa mites. If there are 2 to 3 frames of brood or less, you can try HopGuard, oxalic acid, formic acid, etc. Those are the things that work best when there's minimal brood in the hive. If you already have a lot of brood, so if you're doing a test in late February and your hive already has 5 frames of brood, you're probably going to need to use something like the Apivar or Apigard, something that is in there longer periods of time to kill, even if you have a large amount of brood. So one other real quick note, I'm just going to throw this out there because I'm excited about it. I've been working for about a year now and talking to a lot of researchers and a lot of beekeepers to try to develop some way to keep bees, control varroa mites using mechanical means rather than chemical means, because there's a lot of beekeepers that don't want to put any form of chemical, whether that's oxalic acid or Apivar, they're all chemicals. A lot of beekeepers like to be completely treatment free. And so I've been working trying to figure out, okay, for a small scale beekeeper who's not doing this for a living, who has, under 20 hives, that this is just a hobby, what is a simple, effective way to control varroa mites that isn't going to even work on a commercial level, but will on a small scale level to control varroa mites? And we're wrapping up some tests on some methods this spring, but we've found a couple different ways that look like they have about a 98% efficacy at controlling varroa mites without using any chemicals. And it's just by combining a couple different methods at just the right time of year, summer, right after you harvest your honey, to control varroa mites without chemicals. So anyway, I've got a meeting, a Zoom meeting in early June scheduled. You can check it out on our website, Texas Bee Supply. But we'll be going over how to do that in June once all the tests finish up. So anyway, couple other quick side notes here. Overcrowded in February, it's a great problem if your hive has too many bees in February. But if you've got 2 deep boxes or a deep and a medium on your hive, and that top box is already 80% full of bees and the bottom box is as well, if both boxes are essentially full of bees, you're going to have to do something, or the hives are going to swarm in probably late February or early March. So it's a really good problem. You did a great job and you did all the right things if your hive is that strong, but you don't want them to swarm. So you've really got 3 options to control that process so that they don't swarm. One is you can make a split. I don't really recommend that in February or even early March, because you're not going to be able to find a queen to put in that split. And if you try to let the bees raise their own queen, you may not have that early in the year enough drones to properly mate with that queen. So your odds of finding a queen to buy or getting your hive to successfully raise a queen, the odds are pretty slim. So I would really recommend not going a split route until April, when you can get queens. So until April, you can add boxes. So what I like to do is add a deep box of foundation on top and start feeding them maybe a couple of quarts a week, and they'll draw out that foundation and start filling with brood. And that'll probably take them at least a month to 2 months. And by the time April gets here, you're probably going to have 3 deep boxes full of bees and brood, and you can make a whole bunch of splits. The other option is you can equalize. So you can take frames of brood out of that really strong hive, shake the bees off, and give frames of brood to weaker hives that you have. And that'll slow down the growth on that stronger hive while boosting up the strength of your weaker hives. So if you've got this, if you've got a really strong hive, I would really recommend adding boxes or equalizing brood to kind of slow it down and get ahead of it before it swarms. Not so much for splitting. I would recommend holding off on that until March or April. I think this is the last slide on tips here. What to expect for inspections in February. You might have anywhere from 2 to 8 frames of brood on strong hives, and that is very population dependent. Some of our hives have several frames of brood, and some just have a couple. And then weak hives might just still have a softball sized piece of brood. So it's kind of all over the place for February, but hives are starting to grow. So when you inspect a hive, you should be seeing brood at this point. You should see abundant and growing pollen stores. Like I said, this super cold front in February is kind of taking a hit on that. You should see at least 20 pounds of honey in your second box, and you should have an actively laying queen. If you're not seeing eggs and larvae at this point, you don't have a queen. So, you know, the last week, even in small weak hives, the queen you should have seen eggs and larvae in a hive. So if you're not seeing eggs and larvae at this point, you don't have a queen. Now, I will say that at the end of this cold front, for weaker hives, you may not see eggs and larvae. The smaller, weaker hives, especially, or hives that, you know, maybe don't have enough pollen reserves, will cannibalize brood. So I wouldn't look right after this cold front's over and expect to see eggs and larvae in small, weak hives, but I would have expected to see it over the past 2 weeks because we've had warmer weather. So if over the past 2 weeks you've got a hive that had 0 eggs, 0 larvae, they're most likely queenless. And really, what you can do with them is if they're really weak and small, you just join them with another hive. If they have a good bee population, then you can give them a few frames of brood, and they may try to raise their own queen, and may or may not work. But a few frames of brood will at least keep that population going until you can get a queen a little bit later in the year. So, okay, any questions before we jump into our other topic? You can, if you have questions, you can put them in that chat box, and I can see it when it pops up. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you've got. Okay, Mark says you have 2 overwintered nooks. If you close the entrance and move them into the garage, how long do you think I can keep them in the garage without opening them back up and moving them outside? Do you think they'll make it through the cold snap? So, you know, the garage thing works pretty well, actually. I mean, commercially, for example, I put thousands of beehives in indoor storage sheds and overwinter indoors. I've got some pictures I'll show you in the PowerPoint we're about to get into. But sealing up bees and keeping them inside works pretty well. There's a couple of key things though. Number one, make sure it's sealed, and you want to keep it dark. So you don't want, you know, the lights on all the time in there, because bees are going to try to get out. So you want to keep it dark. You know, you could put the bees inside something in the garage to keep them to keep it dark, but you also don't want them sealed too tightly, because you want the carbon dioxide to be able to escape from the nook box. So you wouldn't want to like put the nook inside a sealed container, because bees have to breathe too. But the other thing is you don't want it to get too warm in there. So the ideal temperature for bees in an enclosed container is under about 45 degrees. So, you know, if you're getting up, you know, if you're getting up into the 60s in your garage, that's getting too warm for them. So I would say if it's keep it in the 40s or 50s in your garage. And if it's in the 40s or 50s, they'll be okay in there, as long as they're sealed up and the lights don't come on. And if it's in the 40s or 50s and it's dark, they can kind of stay in there for almost forever until they start running out of food. So I would leave them in there until we have warm weather again, where we're back up in the 50s. So anyway, something fun to try. Any other questions that you folks have? Stephen, he said, with equalizing, how many frames do you recommend taking out of the strong hive? So with a strong hive, it's not so much how many I would take out of a strong hive. It's more of how I wouldn't give a weaker hive more than 1 frame of brood at a time, because they probably aren't going to be able to keep it warm. So, you know, I would give the weaker hives 1 frame of brood at a time. A stronger hive, I probably wouldn't take more than a couple frames, maybe 2 frames of brood out at a time. You know, I would take 2 frames of brood out, replace it with maybe foundation, and then once they've kind of replenished those couple frames of brood, pull a couple more out. So that's I would kind of do it on a phased approach like that. Okay, any questions that I missed here? All right, perfect. And if you guys have any other questions about the next presentation or not, feel free to put them in the chat box. There's one more. He said, if I see bees bringing in a lot of pollen in the last few weeks, is that a good bet that they have a queen and she's laying, or can it be a laying worker and bees bringing in pollen for drone brood? It's generally a good sign that you've got queen and good brood. That, generally speaking, it's a good bet, yes, that you have a good queen and she's laying. they can bring in pollen for drone brood and a drone layer, but not as much. And I'm not usually seeing a lot of drone layers laying very well this time of year. So I would say there's a better than 90% chance that you've got a good queen and she's laying. So, okay, Skip, would you like me to move directly into the main presentation, or do you guys do a snack break?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, no snack breaks, huh?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, let me stop the sharing there and share this other presentation. All right, hang tight with me just for a second.
Just for those that are late coming on, like I said, we just if you haven't read the newsletter, read the newsletter. We've got good information on there about the new changes in the modeling. So definitely get on that, read that, and then as give maybe a quick intro for Blake. If you don't know Blake, Blake's been beekeeping since he was about 12 or 13. Started off as a scholarship student, moved up into pretty much running several colonies at your house, and then moved up into the commercial side. He runs, well, I wouldn't say he runs Texas Bee Supply, but has expanded from Desert Creek Honey to Texas Bee Supply also, and has been a commercial beekeeper for several years now. And I think it's very good information from Blake on the commercial side that also applies to the hobby side. He's been our Collin County president. He's been the Texas president for the hobby beekeeping. I think you're still on the board for American Beekeeping Federation. So, and then he's been was on the National Honey Board for a while. So he's got definitely lots of good information and does a lot of research. So Blake, thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, Skip. Appreciate that intro. That's much appreciated. So, so yeah, I mean, guys, this is somewhat informal. I mean, I like to, let me skip back a little bit. I really like doing this presentation in front of a live audience so that we can be interactive. I like to kind of take it in a direction that's most helpful to whoever's listening. That's a little harder to do over Zoom. But if you have questions, feel free to throw them out there. This is about a 4-hour presentation. I don't think you guys are going to want to sit here for 4 hours. I can. I'm on Pacific time, so hey, I can go for 4 hours and still get to bed early. But you probably don't want to go for 4 hours. So so I'm going to run through aspects of this really quickly and try to get to some aspects that are most helpful to you guys. So I can't possibly teach you how all the different ways and options to make money in beekeeping. My goal is to partially inspire you and show options and give practical insight where possible. So there are, like I said, limitless ways to enjoy beekeeping and make money in beekeeping on a small scale. And I hope to introduce you to a few of those and help you avoid a few common pitfalls that a lot of folks make when they're trying to make a side income with beekeeping. I've probably made almost all the mistakes that could be made in the beekeeping world, and I'm still making them. So I hope I can steer you away from some of those. We're going to skip through that. We're going to skip through that. So I want to run through quickly with you guys an overview of Desert Creek beekeeping and kind of what we do throughout the year as a commercial beekeeping company. And I usually start there just to give folks a little bit of a flavor of, hey, if I wanted to go all the way to commercial beekeeping, what would that look like? And we're only going to spend a couple minutes on this because I realize that most folks aren't wanting to become a commercial beekeeper. But folks often wonder, hey, if I want to take it to that extreme, what does that look like? And it's just kind of cool to kind of see what the year in the life of a commercial beekeeper is like. So I'm going to run through this real quick, and then we're going to get a little more into the nuts and bolts of ways to make money and different aspects of beekeeping. So I mentioned a minute ago, this is basically the garage where we keep bees in the wintertime. So it's a fancy garage basically. And the bees kind of start the year in January. This is where the bees are. Really from the 1st of October through late January, our bees are in Filer, Idaho. And in Idaho, they are in these indoor storage sheds, for lack of a better word, and they're climate controlled. So they're kept at a perfect 40 degrees. Carbon monoxide and dioxide levels are monitored constantly. The air is filtered and cleaned. Any bees that fall out of the hives dead are vacuumed up and cleaned up. We're monitoring, oxygen levels, etc. These buildings are fully climate controlled to keep it at 40. And what we find is the bees overwinter incredibly well in these buildings as opposed to outdoors. Usually when we used to overwinter in Texas, we would see we would lose about a frame worth of bees in population every month. So, that would usually start in about October, November, December, and then January. So for 4 months, we would lose about a frame of bees per month because the bees are out working. It's when it gets above 55 and sunny, the bees are out foraging. And now they're not really foraging on much, but they're working and bees are dying and they're using up energy. And so if we had a hive that started out 2 deep boxes full of bees, by the time winter was over, they were closer to 1 box full of bees. And then they would also eat about 30 to 40 pounds of honey in Texas as they went through the winter because they were out flying. They're using up all that energy. In sheds over that same 4-month period, a good strong hive eats about 12 pounds of honey. So a fraction of what they eat in Texas. And then they usually lose about a half of a frame of bees over that 4-month period. So they essentially don't decline in strength, and yet and then eat hardly any honey. So it's a relatively new innovation to have climate controlled buildings like this. Beekeepers have been keeping bees indoors for a long time up north, but the climate control technology is pretty new. So from there, the bees in late January, they get shipped from Idaho to California, which is where I am right now. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Modesto right now, and the last of our bees are getting placed in orchards as we speak. And then I'm working with our clients, our growers and inspectors to get our bees inspected, which the growers do to verify the bees are the strength that we've said they are. And then if assuming they are, then we get paid. So it's every almond grower hires inspectors to make sure that he's getting the bees he wants. So we're kind of in the middle of that process. And so the bees will be here in the Central Valley until mid-March. And then, here's the picture of them blooming, the almonds blooming, beautiful when it's blooming. And they'll be here till mid-March. And in mid-March, we load the bees back up and we take them back to Texas. Somebody is asking in the chat, oh, never mind. Sorry, you figured it out. So in mid-March, we bring all our bees back here to North Texas, and that's where we build up our bees, make a little bit of honey, make nooks, and get bees ready for the next honey crop. Probably worth noting here that this is Desert Creek Honey, which is our commercial beekeeping company and honey company. Our Texas Bee Supply is actually a different company. They're sister companies. I mean, my parents and I own Texas Bee Supply, and I own Desert Creek Honey. So they're very closely related, but the bees for Texas Bee Supply are typically more local Texas bees that they don't necessarily travel everywhere that Desert Creek Honey bees travel. So just side note there. But the Desert Creek Honey bees come back to North Texas, and that's where we make all of our splits. There's a picture of us making splits. And then our Desert Creek honeybees often then in late April go to the Houston area. And we do leave 3,000 or 4,000 hives in North Texas, and then a few thousand go to Houston area. And we tend to make a better honey crop in the Houston area than we do in North Texas. North Texas, on a good year, we're making maybe 40 pounds per hive. In the Houston area, on a good year, we're doing more like 80 pounds per hive. So this is us leaving Houston. It's always an exciting day to leave Houston because it is incredibly muggy and hot down there. And so crews are always very excited when it's time to leave Houston and go somewhere else. And so that's them. And this is the other picture over here is a hurricane blowing in right as we're getting the last load of bees out. So that's another exciting element of keeping bees in Houston. And then of course we extract our honey from our Texas crops. All gets extracted, and that's a picture on the left there of our extraction lines. And next, the Desert Creek bees go to North Dakota. And in North Dakota, this is in around the 4th of July. The flowers just start blooming up in North Dakota. So while everything's hot and dry and dead in Texas, our bees can make a second honey crop up in North Dakota where it's 70 degrees all summer long, and the year is just getting going. And so this is so much better for the bees. Instead of sitting in the Texas summer, cooking all from July to October, they're up in North Dakota where there's fresh flowers blooming and it doesn't get above 80 degrees. So the bees do way better up there, and we're able to make a second honey crop with them. And then of course that second honey crop is extracted, and then we sell that honey by bulk. Usually we usually sell it by the barrel or by the tote, because most of the packaging that we do, we also package and resell our honey, but most of that packaging is done with Texas honey, because in Texas, our Texas customers anyway want Texas honey. And then of course we prepare our bees for winter, and we get them ready, and then they ship back to Idaho in around the 1st of October. So that's kind of the year in the life. And of course we have beekeeping crews that travel with the bees. So we've got, houses and areas in all those areas for the crews to go and live and travel with the bees. So it's a bit of a gypsy lifestyle that I did for many years. And I'm very thankful now that we've got crews that can do all that. And I can spend a little less time on the road than I used to. So somebody asked in the chat box a really good question when I was talking about making honey in the Houston area. And that is, they asked, is it true that a flea beetle is being released to kill all the Chinese tallow trees? So if you don't know, the tallow tree is the tree that makes the Houston area such a great honey production region. And it's really not just the Houston area. I mean, really starting about Houston and all the way to Florida, within about 100 miles of the Gulf Coast, all the way to Florida, the Chinese tallow tree grows. And it's been named multiple times the healthiest bee tree in the United States, and certainly the best nectar producing tree in the United States. Up to about 20% of the US honey production comes from the tallow tree. 90% of the honey crop in Texas comes from the Chinese tallow tree. We produce about 15 million pounds of honey in Texas, and 90% of that is from a tallow tree. And then about almost half of the US's bee population, about 1 million hives, moves along the Gulf Coast in the springtime to help build up their bees to then go on and pollinate or make honey elsewhere. So tallow is probably, with the exception of clover up in the Midwest regions, tallow is probably the most important honey crop and plant in the United States. And the USDA and APHIS has decided that they need to all be eradicated, because the tallow tree is an invasive species. Now, it's been here since the 1700s, but it's technically a non-native species. It's like apparently it's more native than most Americans, but it's somehow now an invasive non-native species, and it is invasive. I mean, it's an invasive plant, but there's plenty of mechanical means of control to remove it. But anyway, so they've decided they want to bring in a beetle and a moth from China, um, a, a an invasive beetle and an invasive moth from China, and they want to mass release them in the southern U.S. And these two insects will, over the period of a number of years, they expect it to eradicate the tallow. So that's a really big deal for beekeepers. And I know most of us on this call, most of you on the call are small scale beekeepers and not even from the Gulf Coast area. So you might say, well, why does that matter to me? Well, you know, people that sell breed queens, make nooks, pollinate, they all take advantage of tallow. And that's a massive part of what keeps them in business. So the loss of the tallow would definitely disrupt, you know, a lot of the things you guys need too, like queens, nooks, etc. So, and just from a, you know, caring about the industry standpoint, I mean, it would, Texas would go from one of the top honey producing states to one of the worst. So anyway, there is an open comment period. It's kind of the last thing we can do to stop this. And that is you can comment. Look at that. Mike Hatch put it in the chat, a direct link. So go to that direct link and you can see how to comment against the release of the beetles. And that's the best we can do at this point. So someone asked, are there native plants that can be grown in large quantities to offset the tallow tree for nectar? I've asked that of a lot of folks, and no, I mean, there is no native plant that produces nectar and pollen in that quantity that we're aware of. And you know, getting a movement large enough to mass plant native plants to that scale, you know, millions, we're talking tens of millions of acres, is probably not going to happen. So, you know, I mean, I wish there was a native plant that could replace it, but maybe there is, but I'm certainly not aware of it. And unfortunately, I'm not sure of anyone that has a plant like that. So Scott, you asked, North Texas yields a low honey crop. Is it hard and hard on bees in the summer? Have you considered moving your business elsewhere? Parentheses, I hope not. Thanks for adding that. I hope not. Yeah, I mean, North Texas isn't an ideal place for a commercial beekeeper, but frankly, it's where I live, and it's where our key beekeeping managers live, and it's where our families are. And so, yeah, we'll despite that it's an inconvenient area to be a commercial beekeeper compared to, say, Houston or California or North Dakota, we don't have any intentions of going anywhere. Sandra, you asked, but what else will the moth and beetle kill? And that's a huge thing that we're asking people to comment on as well. Is, you know, when that invasive moth and when that beetle finish off a tallow tree, I don't think they're just going to stop eating and all conveniently die. So those pests have a tendency to jump hosts and start eating something else. So it's kind of an insane plan, but hey, government isn't exactly always logical. So, okay. So I'm going to breeze through a few of these. We also package honey as a company, but you know, we're going to skip through some of that. You guys are probably aware of Texas Bee Supply. I'm not going to touch on that a whole lot. You're aware of, you're aware of kind of what we offer and who we are, I think. So skip through some of this. Okay, so getting into a little more of the kind of nuts and bolts of, okay, if I want to make some income on beekeeping, what does that look like, and what is it going to take to be successful in the beekeeping world? So one thing I want to touch on really quickly is finances in beekeeping. And I love these two quotes. These are really common if you hang around commercial beekeepers a lot. They're always saying, I know there's money in beekeeping because I keep putting it there. And as a small scale beekeeper, you can probably say that too. Hey, I you know, partly own Texas Bee Supply. I know how expensive supplies are. So, I mean, yeah, we know that there's got to be money because we certainly keep sinking in there. And then there's a saying, the best way to make $1 million in beekeeping is start with 2 million. And I can attest to that too. people often laugh and joke at these, but I will say that now more than ever, there is the opportunity to make money in beekeeping beyond what you're putting into it, to make a profit in beekeeping. A couple quick things, just to think about with bees. The 12-month return on investment with bees, if losses are kept at a minimum and average honey crops are made, and you have diversification in place, which we're going to talk about a lot later, you can get about a 12-month return on investment in bees, and we'll talk about that. Infrastructure is one of the most expensive startup costs in beekeeping, whether you've got 2 hives or 200. The initial purchase of the bee suits and the veils and the smokers and all the gear and the woodenware, the startup costs can be expensive. Now you can't really get around that, but those startup costs are cheap in comparison to, say, an extraction, somewhere to extract your honey, and extractors and uncappers. That stuff gets really expensive. So what I really recommend when it comes to infrastructure beyond the bees, the woodenware, and the protective gear, so really when you're talking about an extractor or a place to do your extracting, delay. There's plenty of people in CCHBA that you can borrow an extractor from. You can go to the Talberts, Sabine Creek, and they allow custom extracting to be done there, and you just pay, frankly, a dirt cheap price, in my opinion, to rent their facility for an hour and extract your honey. It's so worth it. And John and Skip will stand there and give you an education as you're doing it. So, I recommend delaying what you can delay as long as possible in the world of beekeeping. And frankly, I did that on a grand scale for a long time. I mean, I partnered with John Talbert, and he and I ran bees together, and I used his facility for a number of years. And I was running hundreds of beehives before I ever built my own, and that let me invest in bees and invest in a forklift and invest in a truck and invest in all of that before I had to go spend a lot of money and build a building and buy extracting gear. So partnering with someone can make a tremendous difference in helping you get started, whether, again, you're talking 20 hives or 200. If you do want to get into beekeeping on a kind of a sideline level, I would check out the FSA, or the Farm Service Agency. They have grants up to $5,000 to get started, especially if I can't remember if it's for a new farmer or a young farmer. They have $5,000 grants. They also have micro loans up to about $10,000 for virtually, I think they're like at 2% interest rate or something. And then they also have loans up to, I think $300,000 for about 3% interest for beginning farmers. So, whether you're looking for a couple $1,000s or several thousand, the Farm Service Agency is pretty helpful, and for virtually no interest. Another resource, if you're running, I'm going to say above 25 hives or so, is ELAP, the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program. And that's a program where if you lose over 22% of your beehives, then they will actually, it's kind of a safety net. If you lose over 22% of your hives, they will give you, it varies every year, anywhere from $100 to $150 for every hive you lose. So it's kind of one of the few, the only safety net you've got in beekeeping. You can also get into the rainfall insurance program, and that is a rainfall insurance for beekeepers. And that is you get with an insurance agent. If you're interested, shoot me an email, reach out to me, and I can share who my agent is. But it basically says, I've got 25 hives in this county during these months, and then if you have a drought, or if you don't have average rainfall, then you get an insurance payout to help compensate for a lost honey crop. So all those things, of course, vary depending on the scale of operation, but they all apply whether you've got, whether you want 20 hives or 200. So one huge thing I so encourage, if you've got 3 hives or if you're trying to get up to 300, is diversification. And in two ways, if you're considering trying to make money in beekeeping, one of the biggest things I encourage you to do while you're trying to figure out what route you want to take is to try a lot of different things, because what I've got here up on the screen is a fraction of the number of things you can do to make money in beekeeping. But experiment, try selling some nooks, try gathering pollen, try making creamed honey, try going to farmers markets, try selling queens, just experiment with the limitless number of options that you have to make money in beekeeping, and then see what you enjoy, see what you've got a market for in your area, see what works well in your area. And don't ever just think, well, all I can do is make liquid honey and sell it at a farmer's market. I mean, there's so much you can do to make money in beekeeping beyond just that. So in the early years, diversify, figure out what you enjoy. But then secondarily, even as you grow, don't just rely on making honey, because there's going to be drought years where you don't make honey, or a year where your bees crash and 80% of them die, and you can't sell nooks, or so keep diversification in mind, because you are relying on the weather, you're relying on an insect who has a pretty high mortality rate. And so try a lot of different things and pick 3 or 4 that really work for you, and pursue those. Some of the most common mistakes that I see for folks as they try to expand their business, again, to any scale, is these 3 things: a lack of knowledge, growing too fast, and not having goals. And I just want to touch on each of these briefly, because they're really important. I told you earlier, I've kind of been there and gone through this. I didn't share a whole lot of my story, but Skip kind of did. I mean, I got started in the world of beekeeping through the CCHBA youth program when I was 12. And I went from one hive in my parents' backyard to commercial operation, and a variety of things. And so I have charting that path. I've made all these mistakes I'm about to talk about in very painful ways. I've made each one of these mistakes. And then I've helped a lot of people try to grow their business in the world of beekeeping. And so I've seen a lot of people make these mistakes. So the first one is a lack of knowledge. And it's really important that you have experience in the world of beekeeping, that you have knowledge, and that you're able to combine both those to make them work. I see a lot of folks, their first year in beekeeping, get incredibly enthusiastic. And I get it. I mean, bees are amazing. And a lot of people get really excited their first year, and they kind of jump off the deep end. And, their first year, they're going out and they're buying 40 beehives, and, buying tons of equipment, buying an extractor, and hey, I sell all that. I'm going to tell you not to do that because I want you to be successful in the long run. And even in the bee supply company, we see a lot of folks come in their first year and they're wanting to buy, $20,000 worth of supplies their first year. And our response is typically, whoa, slow down. We'd love to sell you stuff, but wait a couple years. Learn beekeeping with a few hives. Make sure you know what you're doing, and then start to grow. Because one big question I always ask people when they say, hey, I want to get up to 25 or 30 hives, I say, well, what were your winter losses? What were your losses last year with your 3 hives? And they go, well, I lost all 3. I say, well, the math isn't going to improve when you get up to 30 or 300. So make sure you're successful where you are currently as a beekeeper. Make sure you're able to overwinter 70% of your hives every year. Make sure you understand the basics well, and then start growing. It doesn't have to take 5 years to get up to 50 hives, but get through your first year with a couple hives, get through your second year with maybe 10, go up to 25 the next year, and make sure you're successful at each stage. And this, I think I just got ahead of myself, but one of the biggest other mistakes is expanding too fast, and that's what I just covered. So make sure that this is the part-time job you want. Make sure that you understand what you're getting into. Make sure you understand the costs Make sure you understand the business of it. And one great way to do that is to reach out to a beekeeper that is the same size as that you want to be. So if you want to be at 25 hives, find that beekeeper in our bee club that has 25 hives and visit with them. Hey, what did it cost? What's it like? Can I come work with you this spring and understand? Or if you want to be at 200 hives, find that beekeeper at 200 and really understand what it's going to take. Because I'm going to tell you right now, working 3 hives is wildly different than working 30. It's wildly different than working 300. Or, I mean, every jump in beehive numbers, everything changes. The core basics stay the same, but you know, you can't spend 5 minutes looking at each hive when you've got 50 hives. You know, you got to be able to get through each hive in, you know, sometimes a matter of seconds. So, and then finally, know goals. You know, where you want to be as a beekeeper affects everything. You know, look at if you want to be a commercial beekeeper and get up to 1,000 hives, you don't need to be buying telescoping covers for your beehives. You need to be buying migratory covers. You know, or if you want to cap off at 25 hives, sure, you can get telescoping covers, you can get standard bottom boards. But if you're going to be at, you know, 300 or 400, you need, that's forklift territory. You need to go ahead and start putting your bees on pallets, etc. You know, goals affect a honey house. You know, if you want to be at a max of 25 hives, you probably don't ever need a honey house. You can borrow somebody else's to extract and bottle your honey. But if you want to be at 300, probably not a bad idea to start heading towards building something that's going to fit for 300. Same goes for marketing, the relationships you build in the beekeeping community, et cetera. That all matters when it comes to where you're headed. In the comment, Scott, you said, if you want to read more about mistakes, next month's newsletter will have the next Adventures of a Novice Hobbyist article, and it'll cover some mistakes that Scott made. So there you go. So check out the next month's newsletter, and you can, we can all see all the mistakes that Scott made. So he'll probably be in good company. I'm betting a lot of us have made them. Facilities, and there you go. So it matters. That's many of the facilities I've been in over the years, and this isn't actually the latest one. We just this is where we package our honey now, and we just built another one up near bottom. So this might be a little bit helpful to you. I'm not going to read it off. You guys can see it on the screen, but this is just kind of over the years I found this to be true, and this is probably bigger than you guys are going to find helpful. But in case you want to go really hardcore and go up to hundreds of hives, these space requirements might be helpful for you. Okay, let's see, how are we doing on time? It's 5:30 where I am, so I'm doing great on time, but I realize that means it's 7:30 where you guys are. So Skip, what time do we need to wrap up?
I say 8 o'clock if you, or if you need a little bit more time than that, say around 8 o'clock.
Nope. Yep, 8, that's no worries. I just want to make sure I do the sections I really want to. Let me hit one of these questions real quick though from Mark. Mark said, so on the temperature controlled storage, you assume the bees are not flying out of the boxes since the temperature is kept low. You are correct. So for 4 months, October through the end of January, the bees are not flying at all, which is interesting. I mean, before we started doing it, I didn't think that was possible. I was thinking, you know, how can bees go 4 months without flying, and you know, how do they go to the bathroom, and what happens? And yeah, and they actually do perfectly well. I mean, you know, they don't fly for 4 months, and they do really, really well. That seems to be better for them. So yeah, no, you're right, they don't fly. Sandre, yes, I'm speaking. I'll hit you back privately on that one in a minute, Sandra. Okay, principles of success. So I am going to run through these quickly because I've got about 30 minutes left, and I want to hit on a few other topics. But basically, I'm going to give you a quick overview of why this is important, and then I'm going to run through it really fast. And by the way, this is being recorded, so you guys can go back and watch this recording. So when I fly through this next section, you can go back and listen, slow me down on the recording and listen to it. Basically, when I was getting started with a couple hives in my backyard, I started noticing that there were two camps of beekeepers: those that seemed really good at what they did and could consistently keep bees alive, and those that, even if they've been in it a while, weren't doing so great. And so I talked to hundreds of beekeepers, from small scale beekeepers all the way to commercial beekeepers. And I compiled kind of this list of, okay, here's what the really successful beekeepers did, and here's what the not so successful beekeepers weren't doing. And that's kind of where this list came from. And so, like I said, this is usually a 4-hour presentation. So I'm going to fly through this and just hit it briefly. But one of the big things is adaptability. And new beekeepers are really good at this, but the successful beekeepers are adaptable, and they're not relying on old information. They understand bees and methods change frequently, and they stay in touch with what's happening, which, congratulations, that's what you guys are doing. You're part of a local association, you're learning, and you keep learning how to be adaptable. Hard work, that primarily pertains to hive care. If you're really serious about bees and making money in beekeeping, then you've got to be able to work incredibly hard with bees. It requires a lot of discipline, especially when it comes time to get supers on, or treat for mites, or get food on. No matter what's happening with the weather, if it's uncomfortable, you still got to get out there and take care of your bees. Timely care is huge. If you are 3 weeks late dealing with varroa mites and your mites spike, it can kill your hives. Or if you're 3 weeks late feeding your bees and they were out of food, they can die. If you're 3 weeks late supering bees, you might have just missed the best part of the honey flow. So timely care is incredibly, incredibly important. Huge reason for failure on all scales of beekeeping. Relationships are big, and that's why it's important to join an association on a local level, state level, or national level. I've learned more about beekeeping from people chatting in the halls than I've ever learned in beekeeping books or YouTube videos, etc. I mean, getting to know folks and chatting with them is so incredibly valuable. Having a long-term mindset is really important, and this is important when it comes to managing bees. And with bees, you need to be thinking months ahead at all times. So when you're getting ready to harvest your honey, you need to be thinking about, okay, what do my bees need to get ready for winter? Because winter management begins as soon as you harvest your honey in July. So always be thinking ahead and kind of planning in reverse what your bees need to keep them healthy. Staying close to the basics is really important. There's so much to learn in beekeeping, but if you forget the basics, feeding when they need to be fed, dealing with varroa mites, requeening, every year or so, etc. If you forget those basics, your bees will die. We get distracted, I think, a lot by things that don't matter as much, like should I bottom super or top super, or should I use a queen excluder or not, or exactly how does that entrance reducer go on? Things like that don't really in reality matter much. You're not going to kill your bees if you put the entrance reducer on upside down, or if you don't use a queen excluder. So don't forget what really matters most in beekeeping. Marketing, a little bit of marketing goes a long way in the world of beekeeping. And the beekeeping and the honey industry specifically has come a long way in the past 10 years in the world of marketing. But a little bit of marketing, whether it's a Facebook page that has pictures of you working your bees, pictures of you in your beehives that you can set up at the farmers markets, etc., goes a long way. On a very basic level, I would really recommend, even if you just have a few beehives, get some professional looking labels made, and get real honey jars. Don't use recycled mayonnaise jars or anything reused. Get nice professional jars, a nice professional label, and you can sell your honey, I promise you, for twice what you could sell it for otherwise. So just put a little effort into marketing and you can make a lot more money in beekeeping. I mentioned requeening a second ago, and someone asked in the chat, when and how often do you requeen with thousands of hives? We requeen every year. So, we run, depending on the time of year, anywhere from 5 to 10,000 beehives, and we requeen essentially all of them every year. So, and even though that costs us, tens of thousands of dollars, it's well worth it for us to do it every single year. Involvement in associations. The successful beekeepers I noticed were often very involved in some level, whether it's local, state, national. I would encourage you to be involved in all of them. The more you're involved, the more you learn. And honestly, for me, I'm actually a pretty introverted guy, typically, and being involved in associations really helped force me to get involved, get to know people, and it really helped me learn, and it will for you too. The first time I ever spoke in public was at CCHBA at a meeting, giving my youth program report when I think I had turned 13 at that point, and I was absolutely terrified, but getting involved and staying involved really helped me and helped me learn a lot. So get help. You guys probably recognize this handsome guy. John was incredibly, and I share this picture and a story every time I give this presentation, because finding somebody that can help you learn and help you avoid some pitfalls is incredibly important. And for me, that person was John. John and I worked together for a long time, and he helped me get started in the business. And there's, no one quite like John out there, but there's other folks that can help you. And so if you're looking to grow in beekeeping, find that mentor who can help guide you and help you avoid some of those pitfalls. And don't forget to have fun. I mean, beekeeping is an absolute blast, even though, I've been doing it for not quite 20 years, but coming up on it for too long. It's still a lot of fun. And any beekeeper that does beekeeping for money, whether it's with 20 hives or 200, 20,000 hives, will tell you, you've got to enjoy it. Otherwise, it's just going to be too hard. So it does have to be something you enjoy. And don't get discouraged. I mean, my goodness, you are going to have setbacks in beekeeping. You're going to lose hives. There might be years where you lose 80% of your hives, and everything seems to fall apart. And the most frustrating thing is often when we lose a lot of hives, we don't understand why. Even, there are years where, as a business, I have a 30% loss, and there's years where I have, 50% loss. And we did the exact same thing both years. And there's a lot we don't know about bees and beekeeping as an industry. And so don't get discouraged, keep at it, keep that group of people around you that will encourage you and help you diagnose those issues as they happen. So, more pictures of not getting discouraged. This picture on the far left is from a number of years ago. We had stacked up 2,000 boxes and we were painting them, and it got really windy, and they all blew right over. And then the far right, these were a bunch of supers that we were shipping with a semi, and when the semi got to its destination, this is what the back of it looked like. So we had they wasn't strapped properly, and some of the boxes didn't make the trip. So the last slide before we get into some other practical nuts and bolts is just what's to come in the world of beekeeping. And I just like touching on this briefly, kind of giving you an update on the potential out there. The picture represented here, this is an almond orchard that's just been planted in California. And you see this all over California. The almond orchards are just growing left and right. And it's a huge opportunity for beekeepers. And the opportunity for making an income in beekeeping only grows. And it's because everybody wants to know where their food comes from. Everyone wants to buy local. everybody supports bees and beekeeping like never before. That only grows. I mean, we've been talking about literally since small scale beekeeping kind of exploded in about 2006 and 2007 is when small scale beekeeping really started growing. And every year since then, we all say, you know, it's just a trend. It's just a bubble. Next year, there's not going to be that many people interested in beekeeping. And it has only grown every single year, both interest in beekeeping and concern and interest about bees. You know, the general public is more aware and concerned about bees than ever before. And that means they want to support you as a beekeeper. They're interested in getting into beekeeping. They're interested in buying your products, your honey, your creamed honey, your soaps, your lip balms. Don't forget to tell your story. You know, tell your story to your consumers. And the last stat I want to share you with before we move on is last year, a huge data collection group, Nielsen, some of you may be familiar with it, they asked consumers unaided, so they didn't mention bees or beekeeping or anything. They just asked consumers in a huge survey a question, and they said, when it comes to food and food sustainability, what's your greatest concern? And the number one answer was, my number one concern about food and food sustainability, I'm mostly concerned about the bees. I'm concerned about bees. And so that just shows you the stunning awareness out there when it comes to the public. And for some of you that have gotten into bees in the last 10, 15 years, that might seem normal. But man, 15, 20 years ago, I mean, bees weren't on anybody's radar. I mean, it was something that it was a fringe hobby. So anyway, that's enough of history there. So, okay, let's talk a little bit basic now. We've got about 20 minutes left, so that's perfect timing. Let's talk about where and how to sell products. I just mentioned and gave you some stats on honey and bees everywhere. Price, local, and brand are the three top factors for consumers when they're deciding to purchase honey. Price is huge. You know, you can read that or you can go back and watch the recording. But the interesting thing to kind of combat that last one is that consumers have become educated enough when it comes to honey that they're able to differentiate between premium honey and cheap honey. These are some statements by consumers. We have 3 to 4 bottles of honey in our house, the basic cheap honey, and then local honey. So basically, if they're like cooking with honey, they're buying the cheap honey from Walmart. But if they really want a treat, if they really want something special, they're using that real local honey that they bought somewhere. So consumers have been able to effectively tell the difference between the two, which is good if you're selling the local honey. Honey is good for me and good for the planet is another big thing consumers think. And so the consumers are really positive and excited about honey. And that's a good thing. And the trend, and we don't have time, but I've got 20 other slides that show statistics, but the trend is rapidly moving towards local honey, raw honey, artisanal honey, all things that you guys would be producing and selling. And that's true of honey and creamed honey and lip balms and anything that is made with honey. So the market is strongly headed in your direction over, you know, imported store-bought honey. Legalities, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because Skip did address it early on. And this is, again, swinging in your favor. You don't have to have any sort of licensing or food manufacturer's license or facility as long as you're doing, I think under, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's under 2,500 pounds of honey a year. You're under cottage foods and you don't have to worry about legalities of processing honey. So
Hey, Blake, they don't have to worry. They don't have to worry about any of that anymore. So there's no.
Is there a poundage limit?
No.
Say that again, Skip.
There's not a poundage limit.
No poundage limit. No. Okay, so there you go.
So the biggest thing now is it's going to be a self check to make sure you're doing the right thing.
Okay, so there you go, guys. No poundage limit. You can just keep on packing and selling. Cool. Yeah, as long, Patrick, good point. As long as it's raw honey, which is what you guys would be selling anyway. I mean, you're not going to be ultra heating and pasteurizing your honey. So as long as it's raw honey, you just had a ton of regulations lifted off of you. So pretty cool stuff. Farmers markets, I'm just going to run through some avenues of selling here. Farmers markets, you know, the pros and cons that, you know, before COVID, farmers markets were the way to go. Some of the cons are they're becoming really popular, and sometimes you have multiple honey vendors at each one of them. So that can be a bit of a con, as competition can be a little more fierce. Pricing is at a premium. I mean, I would be charging at least $8 to $12 per pound for honey, and at farmers markets. Mom and pop stores are big ones. You know, selling at feed stores and local health food stores, etc. You know, they love getting a real local honey. You have to consider how to get it to them. Most of them aren't going to come pick it up from you, and so you might have to establish a little bit of a route. But if you've got 20 hives, you probably only need a couple of these kinds of stores to sell your honey, and you know, you'll be able to sell your whole honey crop. The nice thing there is you don't have to go sit at a freezing cold farmer's market from 8 a.m. to noon to sell your honey. Somebody else is going to do it for you. There is some competition, but usually each store is only going to carry one brand, and you do have to sell it wholesale. And I would recommend selling to mom and pop stores anywhere from $5 to $8 per pound wholesale to those mom and pop stores. Now we'll get to big stores in a minute, but e-commerce is a big one, of course. You know, websites are great. I mean, you can have a website and sell a decent amount of honey. You're not going to sell probably thousands and thousands of pounds unless you're pretty established, but you can certainly sell hundreds of pounds through a website. The quality of the website is important, but these days using you know, companies like Wix or Squarespace, you can make a pretty awesome website for almost no money, and you know, not having to know anything about websites. You know, they're essentially plug and play, where you can pop in some pictures and some text and you're good to go. Competition, I mean, the world is your competition online, but people want local, and so establish something that really markets to your local community, and a website's the way to go. You can charge anywhere from $8 to $12 on up for honey on a website, and you know, Amazon, that's probably beyond what you guys are really interested in, so we'll skip that. Grocery retail, so this is more like if you wanted to get into a chain grocery store, or maybe even a local grocery store, so kind of beyond the mom and pop type stores, but more into some form of local or chain grocery store. Some of the challenges there are, if it's a single grocery store, like they're not a chain but just have one grocery store, they're probably not going to make you jump through any health and safety hoops. But if you start selling to a chain grocery store, even if they're small, like a good example, the first chain store I ever started selling in years ago was Market Street grocery store in DFW. And Market Street, I think they've got, I don't know, 8 to 10 stores in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so it's not a huge chain, but they are a chain. And even at that scale, they certainly made me have a food manufacturer's license, which meant I needed some form of licensed facility that I could package food in. And so most chain grocery will certainly make you have, at a bare minimum, a food manufacturer's license. And then if you start getting into, like, you know, Walmart or HEB, they're going to make you have even licensing beyond that. So price range, you know, you're going to wholesale it $4 to $6 a pound for more grocery retail. So we're going to skip through some of that. All right. Oh, I think I got ahead of my PowerPoint here. This was just to illustrate branding. So one quick thing I'd really encourage you to do as you're thinking through how to label your product, what to say about your product, always think about what you can do to make your product unique and different, and what is no one else doing or not many other people doing. And you can apply that to, you know, when you want to take your honey to a farmer's market, or you want to take it to a feed store. what are you not seeing anyone else selling? You know, there's lots of liquid honeys out there for sale, but I see almost nobody selling creamed honey in local mom and pop stores. I see almost nobody making, you know, selling bee pollen in local mom and pop stores, or, you know, that. So look for those unique things that not many other people are doing. Heavily, heavily promote the fact that you're a beekeeper, because that's what the consumer wants. That's what the consumer is looking for. They want to know where their food comes from, and they want to get to know the people behind their food. And so don't try to look professional. I mean, you know, I feel like 10, 15 years ago, the marketing world was, we got to look professional. We got to look like we're a big company. That is not what consumers are looking for. So if you've got 10 hives in your backyard and that's where your honey is coming from, say you've got 10 hives from your backyard, and show pictures of you and your bees, working your bees in your flip-flops in your backyard. I mean, that is what people are looking for now. They want to know you, your story. They want to hear about your pets. They want to hear about your kids. They want to hear about why you fell in love with beekeeping, and they want to see images of that. So don't shy away from the fact that you're a beekeeper, and don't try to look professional. I mean, even as a big company now, I mean, as a company, I often try to kind of show the story behind the company and the people behind the company, and make it feel comfortable for folks. Social media is huge. I mean, have an Instagram page, have a Facebook page. You know, that's a great way for people to get to know you. And again, doesn't have to be a big production. Even if you've got 15 hives in your backyard you're trying to make money on, you can sell your entire honey crop over social media. Start a page, invite all your friends. You know, you'll probably take a couple months to get a few hundred followers. And every time you go work your bees, snap some pictures and put them on Facebook and say, oh, by the way, we still have honey for sale. And I know a lot of people that just by posting some pictures of them and their bees every week or so, sell their entire honey crop. So, you know, don't make it professional. Just be real, and people eat that up. Don't forget to take pictures. I'm going to skip through some of this because it's a larger scale. But yeah, don't forget to take pictures of what you're doing. People love to see those images. Sorry, guys, I'm going to skip through some of this. By the way, if you want to see this entire presentation, every fall I do a presentation called The Business of Beekeeping, and it's about a 4-hour course that gets into the details of all of this. So, okay, here we go. Sorry, guys, I only have a few minutes left, and I want to get to this section. Okay, for the 10 minutes we've got left, I'm going to run through. This is where I kind of want to inspire you with a variety of ideas on what you can do to make money in beekeeping. We've kind of been talking about the how this whole time. I want to run through some ways of doing it that might spark some interest in you. Ag exempt services. So this is becoming really, really popular really fast. Through Texas Bee Supply, you know, we probably get in the spring, you know, 5 or 6 calls a day sometimes of people saying, hey, do you know anybody that'll put bees on my land for ag exemption? I don't necessarily want to keep bees myself, but do you know any beekeepers that'll do that, and then I can get an ag exemption? That's becoming really popular statewide ever since bees were allowed to qualify for an ag exemption. And so there's a lot of beekeepers out there now that are saying, well, hey, I will go out there and charge to run bees for someone on their land, and I'm going to charge them just a little bit less than their taxes are. They're going to save money because they have an ag exemption. I'm going to make money and have a place to keep my bees. So there's a lot of sideline businesses that have sprung up of beekeepers charging this service more or less to keep bees on other people's property to help them get an ag exemption. Bee concierge service, you know, with the constant and huge and ever growing interest in bees and beekeeping, there's a lot of brand new beekeepers that want help and want someone to come out and help them make their first split, help them pull honey. If they think they have an issue, they need help. And so a lot of beekeepers are saying, okay, hey, I know what I'm doing. I've been doing it for a number of years now. So for $75 an hour, I'll go out and I'll help people with their bees and their issues. So that's another side business. We talked about diversification. You can diversify, by the way, beyond just making liquid honey or creamed honey. As I just mentioned, you can even get into services. I don't think I mentioned it in here, but bee removals are certainly another one that a lot of people get into and make some serious money at. Honey, just selling raw liquid honey is always a good one. Selling pollen, you know, a 8-ounce jar of pollen retails for anywhere from $16 to $25, and a strong hive in, you know, the spring season can bring in 1 pound to 2 pounds of honey per day. So we start doing the math on that. That is worth far, far more than honey is. I'm going to skip through that. Since we don't have time to go over how to gather pollen. Gathering pollen is pretty simple. If you want to know more about how to do any one of these products, let me know. And I could probably do a follow-up presentation for CCHBA later in the year about products of the hive and how to do each one of them. Or you can always shoot me an email and I can give you some more info. Comb honey is a big one. You know, a great way to make comb honey is using the raw surround honey super. And one of my favorite ways to make comb honey, you know, if you've ever made it before, you know that it can be challenging because you have to, the bees have to redraw out the honeycomb every single year. And it can be tough to get bees to draw out a whole brand new super of honeycomb every single year, especially in North Texas where we don't have huge honey crops. So a great way to make a little bit of comb honey to sell is get in your honey super, whether it's a medium box or a shallow box, but use a medium or a shallow from last year, let's say, that already has drawn honeycomb, and take out every other frame and put in a frame of cut comb honey foundation. So to make cut comb, you don't want the plastic foundation because you've got to cut it out. You don't want to cut and chew on that plastic foundation. So instead of plastic foundation to make cut comb honey, you use pure beeswax foundation. So you can, every other frame, put that frame of pure beeswax foundation, and the bees often won't have any trouble drawing and filling that in 1 year because you've done it every other frame. Or if you just want one frame of comb honey, you can just pull out one frame of that comb and put that frame of cut comb honey in the super and just have them draw out 1 or 2 frames at a time. So it's a quick, easy way just to make a little bit. Virginia, you said on the topic of ag exemption services, who needs to check with the owner's county extension office, the beekeeper or the landowner? You know, I've seen it both ways, you know, because some people that do services make the landowner figure out all the details and fill out all the paperwork, and the beekeeper says, all I'm going to do is provide the bees and you've got to figure everything else out, which is perfectly fine. Then some services, usually the ones that are charging a little bit more or doing it for a little more serious of a business, they know all the regulations. They help the landowner fill out all the paperwork. You know, it's kind of a full service, you know, thing where they help them with everything. So it kind of runs the spectrum though. Keep in mind, if you are making comb honey, a really strong hive is the most critical aspect of needed to make a cut comb honey. There's the raw surround supers, by the way, that I mentioned a second ago. Propolis, I mean, a big one that a lot of people overlook is propolis. Then you can produce propolis. These are propolis traps. This is a lot of fun. This goes right between your inner cover and the top of your box. And you can, it's kind of like a queen excluder, but it's a sheet of plastic. The bees will fill it with propolis, especially in the fall. And then you can stick that trap in the freezer and flex it, and it pops all that propolis out. Propolis, again, it works best on a really strong hive. And, you know, usually it's made between September and October, which is kind of cool because your bees aren't really producing anything for you that time of year anyway. And so you can have them make propolis. Colgate came out with a whole brand of propolis toothpaste. There's a number of places you can sell your propolis in bulk. So even if you just make, you know, 10 pounds of it, let's say, there's some companies that will buy it for many dollars. I forget the price. I think $10 to $20 a pound. They'll buy your propolis. Creamed honey is a big one and a fun one. And, I won't get into all the details of that. You guys have seen presentations through CCHBA of how to make creamed honey. It's a fun one and I love it. But it's a great way to add value to your liquid honey beyond just selling it as a liquid honey. And by the way, a lot of these things I'm talking about, you can do with just one hive. I mean, you could take the same single hive and gather pollen in the spring, make a honey crop in late spring and early summer, do propolis in the fall, and that's all upping the income from just the one beehive. Someone asks, for hobby beekeepers, what's your opinion on the flow hive? Is it worth it for us in North Texas? So the flow hive, I have tried the flow hives in North Texas without a lot of luck. I have mixed feelings about it. I know some people in North Texas that have had good luck with flow hives. But two or three things. One, the bees do not like using it. It's really hard to get the bees to move up into the flow hive super and fill it with honey. So it's really tough to get them to get started. It's also like incredibly expensive. I think it's $600 to $800. And by the way, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking like it's this whole flow hive. I mean, that's just honey super. I mean, the rest of the flow hive is not any different than any other beehive. It's just the honey super that's unique. So, you don't need a whole flow hive. All you really need is the flow super, and it can go on top of any hive. So, but be aware that a lot of people struggle with it because they can't get the bees to move up into it. And that's because you need an incredibly strong hive to kind of force that to get like so full and so strong that they don't have anywhere else to go. And then they'll go up and start filling the flow hive. The other thing is, for that price, you can buy a honey extractor. So, I wouldn't say don't ever try it, but understand that it's expensive. And I'd say probably 50-50 shot, the bees aren't going to work it. So, if you have the money and you know what you're doing in beekeeping, sure, I'd say give it a shot. But that's kind of my non-answer there. Wax is another one people tend to overlook. Solar wax melters are fantastic for melting small amounts of wax. And then a lot of people buy wax these days. They use it for crafts, they use it for furniture polish, all sorts of things. So don't overlook your wax. This is a picture of a solar wax melter we have, and works really, really well. Some crazy ideas. We sell honey to a guy that makes honey salsa, and it's delicious, and he sells it like crazy. Unique idea. With the cottage food, you could probably make some honey salsa in smaller quantities and sell it. It's a great way to, again, stretch out your honey crop into some other products. The same guy makes different colors of honey and puts them all in a gift basket, and you can taste different colors of honey all in the same gift basket. We sell honey to another person that makes honey chocolates, and they make honey chocolates that sell incredibly well. And so that's another cool idea. Nooks are a big one, with the interest in beekeeping, that the forever growing interest in beekeeping. A lot of people buy nooks. And so if you're running a small number of hives or have extra bees and you don't want all your bees, you can make up some nooks and sell them through your local bee club. And you'll often find a lot of people ready and willing to make and purchase nooks. Now that's a whole other presentation. I have a whole presentation on making and selling nooks, but it's a whole other adventure. Queens are another one. I often tell people if I were starting over in beekeeping today, I'd probably be a queen breeder, because the demand is limitless, absolutely limitless. I mean, on a local level and a national level, you simply can't rear enough queens between March and June. I mean, it's stunning. So, if you're interested at all in queen rearing, man, start rearing some queens, and for almost any price, you can sell local queens for 30 to 50 bucks a piece if they're raised locally with good genetics, and you'll find a ready market for them. Other products, I mean, you can read it, but I mean, soaps, lip balms, honey peanut butters, honey almond butters, candles, lotions, honey sticks, the list goes on and on and on. So I'm going to shut it down there just because we're maxing out our time. But hopefully that's been helpful in giving you guys some ideas to make a little bit of money on beekeeping. And I'll ramble for a couple minutes. If you have any final questions that you want to put in the chat box, I'll give you just a second to ask those if it pertains to anything we've been talking about. But like I said, if you ever want to see the whole presentation, then feel free to I think November is the next time we have this class that gets into, again, a lot more detail around a lot of these topics. And I think we're on slide 80 of 130. So it goes a bit deeper. So anyway, I mean, Skip, I'll hang out for a bit and watch for any questions, and I'll turn it back over to you. If I see questions, I can answer them through the chat box.
All right, thanks, Blake. Awesome presentation. Definitely, that's one of those things that definitely get your beekeeping experiences through there. Definitely get out in the club levels, local level. You can get to the state level, and then also the national level. You can do that. You definitely learn a lot. Get networked. So networking is one of the biggest things. And I still talk with Blake on a regular basis, and we can go back and forth on what the prices are doing or what the bees are doing, what California's doing. So it's always good to have somebody to bounce things off of. So it's always good to have that person. Also, quick note: if you weren't here for the last month, our own Virginia Allen is now our American Honey Princess. So if you have not got information from them, go on Facebook to the American Honey Queen program. Get on their Facebook page. They do a lot of information throughout the state and different other states they go to. So it's always good to watch what the girls are doing and what they're presenting on. So there's a lot of good information that way, just to learn about the different states, and that's always a good resource. And I know going through the national conference, I've gotten several people on my website now from Washington to Pennsylvania, Florida, that I keep in contact with. We talk about our bees and different other things. So it's always good to know. And then if that is, I don't have any other information. Please read the newsletters that are coming out. That's why we put them out there. Sometimes we don't have enough time to get the information out there. So please read the newsletter. I'll try to keep current on all that. And so, like I said, this month I put out there about the changes in the bottling rules. So it does affect everybody. So go in there and read that. Like I said, it's no longer by the health department anymore. They're referring to FDA as our local guidance. So that'll definitely cover us there and changes the rules for you selling honey. So there's no longer a self requirement. You can actually start selling at website or stores or anything like that. So it doesn't matter the size. I don't see any more questions directly to Blake, but again, Blake, thanks again, and appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys.
And maybe we can get you back on for some of the products of the hive as a later presentation if we've got some room for you.
Anytime, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Mike, I think we're good here, and thank you everyone for showing up, and we will see you next month. If you don't know, we are having our business meeting next week, so if you're interested, let us know. You'll have to request from the board info at the board at cchba.org if you want to get on, so we can send you the link. And thank you very much.